Good morning, Year 5. Welcome to Monday's English lesson. Hope you had a good weekend and that you are up to date with the reading in Street Child. You need to have read up to the end of chapter 12 by now. So if you haven't, then I suggest you pause this video and you go back into the Google Drive folder and you find Friday of last week and you find chapters 11 to 12 as read by the lovely Mrs. Dmitrovich and listen to that. If you have listened to it, then carry on with this. Today we're going to be predicting what will happen. We're going to make a story map and we're going to retell an incident. And we're getting an awful lot about some of the characters in Street Child. So I want you to think about what happened in chapters 11 and 12. In particular, Jim meets two new characters in chapter 12 and they will be very important to him in his life. Now the first one is Shrimps, and Shrimps becomes like a brother to Jim. And we are going to be looking at his character in Class Reader. So it's important that you have read the chapter and that you really think about Shrimps. The second character is Dr. Bernardo. And you may think about the very opening of the book when a man called Barney was trying to get Jim to tell him his story. And you might want to think about the relationship between Barney and Dr. Bernardo. Okay, because it is Dr. Bernardo who later offers Jim hope and a home, and it's actually based on a real person. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit of background information about Dr. Bernardo. He began his work in London in 1867 by setting up what was known as ragged schools in the East End of London. This was a very poor area of London and it enabled some very poor children to get a very basic education, which would give them a chance to get a better job in life. And one evening, a boy at the mission, Jim Jarvis, took Mr. Bernardo, Dr. Bernardo, his name was Thomas, around the East End, showing him children who were sleeping on the roofs and in gutters. The encounter really affected Thomas Bernardo, and so he decided to devote himself to helping destitute children, and that's what he spent the rest of his life doing. And in 1870 he opened his first home for boys in Stepney Causeway, which is a place in London. So up until then he just offered schooling, but from 1870 he offered them a home, somewhere that they could sleep at night and get a decent meal. And he regularly went out himself at night into the slum districts of London to see if he could find other destitute boys that he could help. The story goes that one evening an 11-year-old boy called John Summers, he was turned away because the shelter was full. And 2 days later he was found dead from malnutrition and exposure. From then on, Thomas Bernardo decided that he couldn't bear for anybody else to lose their life in that way, and he never refused any child admission, and in fact he put on the doors of his homes, no destitute child ever refused admission. So that was Dr. Bernardo. But the charity Dr. Bernardo still goes on today. Even though Thomas Bernardo isn't around with us anymore, he left a legacy, a charity which helps so many children every year. It's one of the UK's leading children's charities, and it works directly with over 200,000 children, young people and their families every year, and runs over 900 vital services across the UK. Every Bernardo service is different. Some help children who are disabled. Some will help where families are dealing with mental health issues. Others support children whose families are struggling financially. But each one believes in the potential of every child and young person, no matter who they are, what they've done, or what they've been through. Very worthwhile charity. The other character was Shrimps. Okay, and what I would like you to do is to make a mind map to show everything you know about Shrimps. Okay, so I want you to think, what have you learned about what he looks like? Why is he called Shrimps? You learn that in the chapter. Do we know anything about his family? Do we know anything about what he does for a living? And do we know what he's good at and what he does with Jim? So I want you to mind map everything you know about Shrimps. And then underneath, perhaps you could write a prediction or think about what do you think is going to happen to Shrimps in the end. This task is going to really help you with Class Reader, so it is worth spending some time on. So You can always go back and listen to chapter 12 again. Okay, just before you go, once you've done your mind map on shrimps and you've done your prediction, can you then go into the Google Drive folder and listen to and read chapter 13 of Street Child? It's in today's folder. And as you're reading and listening to it, could you jot down the key events that happen in this chapter? You'll need this for the second task that we're going to do today. Okay, so you're going to pause this video, going to do your task on shrimps, and then you're going to listen and read chapter 13, and then you'll come back. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you have now listened to and read chapter 13, and you have made some notes about what happens in the story, because our next task today is to draw a story map with symbols for the key people, places and events that happen in chapter 13. So I've done an example based on another story here. We all know the story, I hope, of the 3 little pigs. So here's my story map. So we know that the story is about 3 little pigs. So I've got 3 little pigs here, and they decide that they are going to collect together. Well, one of them collects some straw, one collects some sticks even, one collects bricks, and then they go off, and the first little piggy builds his house of straw, the second builds his house of sticks, and the last one builds his house of bricks. It's a bit like a tongue twister. And then the big bad wolf comes along and he knocks on the door of the first piggy's house and he says, little pig, let me come in. And the little pig replies, not by the hairs of my chinny chin chin, because he's a bright little piggy and he knows that it's going to be trouble if he lets the wolf in. But the wolf threatens, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. And indeed he does. The straw house is blown away. But the first little piggy's very quick. He runs out and he runs to his little brother's house, which is made of twigs. And the wolf follows and says, little pig, let me come in. And the piggy says, not by the hairs on my chinny chin chin. So the wolf threatens to again, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. And indeed, the house of twigs is blown away. And the 2 little piggies now run to their brother's house, which is made of bricks. And the wolf says, little pig, let me come in. And again, the pigs go, not by the hairs on my chinny chin chin. So the wolf threatens, I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your house down. But this time he finds it really tricky. So he climbs up onto the roof and he tries to go down the chimney. You can see the arrow pointing to the wolf going down the chimney there. And then finally you can see the wolf ends up in the pot of boiling hot water that the 3 little pigs have put in the fireplace, waiting to finish the wolf off. So this was a story map. You can tell the story using it. It's just got little pictures and some words that annotate the key things that are happening and being said in the story. So your task today is to do that for chapter 13 that you've just listened to and made notes on. So I've started one here. So you can see that I've done a very artistic picture of the Lily, which is the boat that Jim gets taken to by Grimy Nick. And I've said Jim has been captured by Grimy Nick and taken to the Lily. And I've also annotated here some words I've taken to describe how Jim is feeling at the time. He's scared, he's anxious, and he's uncertain. And then what happens is Nick threatens Jim by getting Snipe to bite Jim on the wrist. So these are the jaws of Snipe. And you can imagine that at this point, Jim is shocked, afraid, terrified, and in agony. And then the next step, Jim is taught to shovel coal, because we get to know that the Lily is actually a coal lighter, and it collects coal from the big ships out at sea and it brings them into shore. And so there's a lot of shoveling coal and moving it from one place to the other. And at this point, he's exhausted, defeated, and feeling very alone. He's only a small boy, and it's a very physical task. Okay, so then you need to carry on. What happens next? What picture would you draw? It doesn't have to be detailed. You can see the level of my drawing. I'm sure you can all do a lot better than that. But the key thing is that you annotate your pictures and you explain what's happening just in a few words, and perhaps you add some really descriptive words that you've taken from the text to help explain how Jim's feeling and other things in the stories, perhaps some key vivid vocabulary from chapter 13. And your teachers and I look forward to seeing your story maps once you've done them. Okay, important thing is that before you send them to us, can you check through your story map? Are you able to retell the chapter to somebody using your story map? Okay, and as you go through it, just add details that you think you've left out or that you've forgotten. You can always go back to the text and listen to Mrs. Dimitrovich reading it again so that the story map becomes increasingly competent and detailed. Okay, goodbye everybody. I hope you enjoy doing the story map and we'll see you tomorrow.